Okay, so like everyone who's into crypto knows, Bitcoin has had a pretty crazy ride so far.
Totally. Yeah.
But like, what about the future, right? Where's it all headed?
Right.
So we've been diving deep into this article that's been making the rounds, and honestly, it paints a wild picture for Bitcoin in COM 25.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, could we see Bitcoin hitting $200,000 by the end of the year?
Seriously.
Yeah, it's a real possibility according to this article.
Wow.
So that's what we're going to be looking at today. And, maybe you're thinking about finally taking the plunge, or maybe you're already like a seasoned crypto pro. Either way, you're going to want to hear this.
For sure.
So one of the biggest things that jumps out from this article is this whole idea of like institutional adoption.
Yeah, that's huge, right?
Huge, yeah.
Like for so long, Bitcoin has been kind of like the Wild West, right?
Totally.
It's been all tech geeks and,
Yeah, and like libertarian types.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. But now we're seeing real interest from like the big players, hedge funds, big corporations, even governments.
It's pretty crazy to think about, right?
It is, yeah.
Like, what do you think is driving this whole thing?
Well, I think a lot of it goes back to, former President Trump's executive order.
Oh, yeah, right.
That really paved the way for some clearer regulation, which, was really needed, I think.
For sure.
And that kind of like opened the door for all these institutions to get involved. When the government steps in and says, hey, this is a legitimate thing,
right,
it creates this sense of trust.
Cool.
And that trust brings in the big money.
Yeah, for sure. So with all these big players getting into the game, does that mean like the volatility we've seen with Bitcoin is like finally over?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's funny, the article actually talks about the whole like 4-year Bitcoin price cycle thing.
Oh, yeah, right, with the halving events.
Exactly, yeah, and all those like crazy peaks and valleys.
Yeah.
Well, there's this guy, Matt Hugin from Bitwise, who thinks that cycle might be changing. Yeah, he thinks as Bitcoin matures and we see all this institutional money coming in, those price swings could become way less extreme.
That'd be interesting.
Right.
So no more like waking up in a cold sweat,
Yeah, exactly. More like gentle waves instead of, a tsunami.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess that would make Bitcoin a lot more appealing to like regular investors too, right?
Absolutely. If people aren't so worried about losing their shirt overnight, they're way more likely to jump in.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because like, how high are we talking here?
Well, Bitwise is predicting that even without some of the more like out there scenarios we've been talking about, Bitcoin could hit $200,000 by the end of 2025.
Wow. Okay, so even if things stay kind of like status quo,
right,
200,000 is still on the table.
It's definitely a possibility.
Okay, so that's pretty wild. But the article also brings up this even crazier idea, right? Like the U.S. government setting up a national Bitcoin reserve.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I'm not an expert or anything.
Sure.
But if the U.S. starts holding Bitcoin like alongside gold, I mean, that just seems like it would send a massive signal to the rest of the world.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Governments, especially one as influential as the U.S., they tend to be pretty cautious.
Right.
So if they come out and say, hey, we believe in Bitcoin enough to hold it as a reserve asset,
right,
that legitimizes it like crazy on a global scale. I mean, we could see a total domino effect with other countries following suit.
Yeah.
Demand would go through the roof and the price.
Yeah.
Who knows?
That's kind of scary to think about, honestly.
It is, yeah. I mean, it's exciting, but also a little unnerving.
Yeah, for sure. So it's not just governments, though, right?
Right.
The article mentions the SEC, too, like potentially making it easier for big institutions to hold Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's another huge piece of the puzzle, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Wall Street and the big banks, they've been kind of like dipping their toes in the water for a while now.
Right.
But if the SEC comes out with clear regulations that make them feel comfortable,
Yeah.
they could go all in. And that would be like pouring gasoline on a fire.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it seems like there are a lot of factors that could totally transform the Bitcoin landscape by 2025.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Like we've got increased institutional adoption, maybe smoother price cycles, potential government involvement, and a more like welcoming regulatory environment from the SEC.
Yeah. It's like Bitcoin is finally growing up.
Right. It's not just this like fringe thing anymore.
Exactly.
It's becoming more mainstream.
Totally.
So here's a thought I was having.
Yeah.
If Bitcoin really does become this like widely accepted stable asset, what happens to like traditional finance?
That's a great question.
Is this the start of like a whole new financial era?
Yeah.
Where decentralized digital currencies are like challenging the old guard.
It's definitely something to think about, right?
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing. It's like we're on the edge of something really big here.
It feels that way, yeah.
So I think that's something for everyone to kind of ponder as they continue to explore this crazy world of crypto.
Absolutely. It's a wild ride, that's for sure.
Yeah, thanks for breaking all this down with me.
No problem. It was fun.
Yeah, definitely a lot to think about.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, well, we'll see you next time.
Sounds good.